Many of these tips are writing rules. And once you learn these rules, you will know when it's okay to break these rules. Until then, practice these things and it will help you improve, I promise. So here they are. Drum roll, please. My 10 tips to becoming a better writer. Tip number 1, read, read, read. One of the easiest ways to learn to write great fiction is to read great fiction. So pick up the kind of books that you want to write and read them. Inhale them. Study them. This will help you learn what works and what is being published. Tip number 2, know your reader and your genre. Decide who you're writing for and what you're writing. Are you writing picture books for kids, chapter books for beginning readers, contemporary stories for middle graders, young adult fantasy, historical romance for adults? Decide. Pick a genre and an audience and stick with it, at least for a while. You can always change your mind later, but if you're seeking publication, you're going to want to brand yourself in some kind of way. Tip number 3, point of view. I suggest telling the story from one person's head or one point of view at a time. Head jumping can be really frustrating to a reader. If you want to do more than one point of view, I suggest you keep it to a scene or chapter breaks. So there's one scene from one person's head, and then in the next scene we're in someone else's head, or by chapter. That is a lot safer. Tip number 4, problem. I've read books where I was in the 3rd chapter and I still didn't know what was happening. You need a plot. A great story must have one, and the easiest way to do this is to give your character a problem to solve. Maybe they choose to get involved in the problem, like Nancy Drew nosing around in a crime. Or maybe the problem was thrust upon them, like Harry Potter becoming a wizard, Aragon finding a dragon's egg, or Anne Shirley getting adopted and then thinking she was going to get turned away because she wasn't a boy. Readers need to know as soon as possible what the character wants and what they're facing. If you don't have a problem for them, you don't have a story. Tip number 5, show, don't tell. This was the greatest mystery for me when I started out writing. I did not understand what it meant, and it was driving me crazy because I kept getting rejected for this very reason. You're telling instead of showing. What does that mean? You will hear show, don't tell over and over in your quest to becoming a published author. So commit it to memory now and figure out what it means. The best way I can explain it is pretend you're a cameraman and you're filming a movie. And the only way the viewer can know what's happening is what you describe. Otherwise, the screen is totally blank and they see nothing. So a sentence like, Courtney felt scared, is telling. To show this, you would need to describe on that video what is happening that shows the reader that Courtney is scared. For example, Courtney stepped onto the front porch, her gaze lingering on the opened front door. From inside, a thump. Breaking glass. Her heart rattled. What to do? See, that showed us that she was scared rather than you just informing us Courtney was scared. That's the trick. It takes practice. It also takes a lot more words, which will make your story longer, which maybe is a good thing for you, and maybe it's a bad thing. You don't need to show everything. There is a time to tell when you're in a novel and a time to show. Most of the time you want to show because it creates a greater emotional experience for the reader. Tip number 6, deleting adverbs. An adverb is a part of the speech that modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. Sounds really boring, right? English, who wants to learn that? You do if you're going to be a novelist, okay? For example, she was beautiful. He drove perfectly. They played very well. Adverbs are often formed by adding an ly to the end of an adjective, okay? And it's those ly adverbs that tend to get used far too often, and they are a sign of telling. They're telling because they tell the reader exactly what to think. And you don't want to do that. You want to show what's happening, and the reader will get emotions based on your good writing. For example, she was beautiful doesn't really show us much, but the reader would rather see her beauty because you describe it to them. So, for example, you could say something like, she was small-boned with big brown eyes and lashes that seemed to blink in slow motion. Her hair fell in black coils over her shoulders and down her back. Oh, isn't she lovely? See what I mean? Just take a little time and practice. Challenge yourself. You can do this. Tip number 7, be specific or cut, cut, cut. When you're writing your first draft, just write the thing. Just get it on the page. Give yourself permission to stink and get the first draft out there. But when you're going back through to edit, because you must edit, look for passive, dull, boring words that really don't say much. For example, John climbed the tree and looked at the mountain. It's an okay sentence. Kind of boring though, right? So let's look at those vague words and see if we can spice it up a little bit and be more specific to what is actually in your head that you want the reader to see on the page. John shimmied up the swaying willow and gazed at the craggy, monstrous peak of Mount Denali. This gives us a lot more information. We get motion in the swaying of the tree. We get what type of tree. We get geography. We know he's in Alaska. Good writing is using the right words in the right place, and it takes practice. Tip number 8, get rid of or make simple the said tag. This is one of those places where an agent or editor can open your manuscript and know at a glance if you're an amateur writer or not. For example, "Get out," Sharon screamed angrily. This goes back to showing and telling again. First of all, the reader should know that Sharon's angry based on what's happening in the scene. If Sharon finds her brother in her room reading her diary and you write, "Get out," Sharon screamed, the reader knows she's angry because of what's happening and because of your exclamation point and because of the word screamed. So there's really no need to add that ly adverb that says she's angry, right? Also, an exclamation point doesn't whisper. Punctuation can show, and this particular exclamation point shows volume of voice. So if Sharon's brother's in her room reading her diary, you might write, "Get out," without any said tag at all, and the reader knows who said it. But if the scene is different, maybe Sharon's boyfriend just confessed that he's been cheating on her, and you might write, "Get out," Sharon whispered. And the reader would know she's mad, but the volume was more about intense pain and hurt, and maybe holding back tears than it is about anger. And you might not even need the whisper. You might just say, "Get out," and the reader can feel it because of the emotion in the scene you created. You could also use action to show emotion. For example, Sharon jerked open the door. "Get out." You don't need to say "she said." You don't need any of that. You just have the action and then what she says. Tip number 9, avoid flashbacks. The best rule of thumb is don't tell the reader a bunch of stuff they haven't wondered yet. You need to set that up. You need to hint about a secret. You need to hint about a mystery that the reader starts to wonder, why is that? And then at the point where the reader's dying to know, then you could have your flashback, or then you could tell why in another way. Show why. So you hint at the secret, and maybe you give clues. Perhaps you put the facts into dialogue or narrative. Or you break the story up like a broken piece of glass and put a little shard here and a little shard there throughout the book so that all these clues come slowly and build up into this big aha moment for your reader. It's so much more powerful that way. You want to create these great payoffs in your story. You don't want to cheat by just dumping a bunch of information in there. And it's far more interesting than yanking the reader out of the story to have them read this little aside. Let's be honest. Most readers are going to skip over that. They'll be like, "Wait, I was just with that. I just want to know what they were doing. I want to get back to them." And they'll flip the pages. You don't want your readers flipping pages. So if you must have a flashback, keep it short and have a good reason to stop the story. Tip number 10, write, write, write. You would think this would be obvious, yet I waste so much time thinking about nothing, thinking about what I'm going to write, biting my fingernails, getting a snack, writing to-do lists of the things I'm going to write, all kinds of things instead of actually writing. Learning to write great fiction takes time. Don't be discouraged. You can do this. Practice and your craft will improve, I promise you. So if you're not writing, you can't ever hope to improve. So you best get typing right now and stop wasting time on YouTube.